Oh, hi everyone. We're going to start very soon. I just wanted to have a few more people to join us before I introduce Dr. Samuel Law. So just be there with us. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. While we're waiting for a few more participants, I just wanted to start this webinar so that we have enough time for everyone. Hi, my name is Emily, and some of you already might know Maria and I through the Journey to Promote Mental Health. Today, this morning, I'd like to start the webinars and introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Samuel Law. Just a little bit about him. Dr. Samuel Law is actively involved in the equity, gender, and populations divisions of Department of Psychiatry. His research interest is in across cultural issues in psychiatry, including cross-cultural and health system studies, health economics, and knowledge translations and service delivery models. As the lead of the department's China initiative, he also involved in liaisons, the development research and educational exchange with the Chinese counterparts. His clinical work is mainly in community-based care and emphasized in assertive community treatment and clinical consult to the ethnic minority population. So he currently is a staff psychiatrist at St. Michael Hospital, clinical director, assertive community treatment team at the Mount Sinai Hospital, associate head of community psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital, as well as the associate professor, Department of Psychiatry at U of T. So please join me to welcome Dr. Samuel Law. Just a few things before I pass the screen to Dr. Law is that if you have any questions, please only type in the chat box, not on a answer and questions box, okay? Only chat box where he can get your questions accordingly. So if he's engaged in one theory, he will get to your questions as soon as he can. And this video will be archived on our website at hongfook.ca in a couple of weeks. So if you know of anybody that missed this chance, they can have another chance to review this video. And at the end of the webinar today, there is a survey. We'll send it to you as soon as you end the video. If you can kindly have that, take a few minutes to complete that would be great. So thank you so much, and I hope you guys all enjoy this webinars this morning. So please welcome Dr. Law.
Okay, so adjusting my photograph. Well, thank you very much for all those who are here. I think there are 11 people, and it's my honor and pleasure to work with you today on this webinar. And it's a little bit unusual for a sort of a clinician teacher like myself to use a webinar, because usually this lecture does quite well with an interactive style where you can ask questions more readily and we're in the same room. But with technology, we can reach more of you in different places and some more time efficient. So here we go, and bear with us. And I really, really would welcome all your comments as we speak, sort of a contemporaneously, just simultaneously. As if any question, just type it up, and I'll get a sense. What are you thinking? Whether the level is suitable or the content useful at all. And you know, if you miss this chance to write a question, it probably will get next one. So in that spirit, let me just introduce myself a little bit. If you saw my last name, L-A-W, a lot of people would think must be a Scottish guy. But I think today in Toronto, if you see a L-A-W, half a chance it would be an English Scottish person, and half chance is somebody who named it in Hong Kong. That's the local spelling for my phonetic name, Law. And about you, I heard from Maria and Emily that it's about 40 of you who have signed up, and I see about 11 of you right now. And many of you may have BAs in community work or sociology or psychology, and you're working with immigrants who are resettling. And I would try to tailor some of the talk to you with that framework in mind. Just as a connection, I would say this is a model that I'm introducing. It's the same thing that I would teach the medical students at U of T or the psychiatry residents who are completing their residency in psychiatry. So it's a model that has a lot of history and has a lot of currency, and I hope you can use that in your day-to-day work. And you're at the front line of Toronto's dynamic, growing community level, and I really appreciate your work. And I think some of your clients may come to psychiatry, but you are really handling a lot of the interesting work out there. So let me move ahead. If you have any, as I said, if you have any questions, please type in the chat box. So let me see. If I'm going to advance the slide, I press usually this. Here we go. Working. Okay. Thanks to Hong Fook and my primary work site as part of U of T, we also work in a teaching hospital at St. Mike's. Today's outline, as you've seen in the title, we're going to talk about something called cultural formulation interview. And in particular, I will also explain in more detail a tool that, as I say, we teach to all the psychiatry curriculum called the Explanatory Model. And I'm hopeful that it will be applicable in any setting like yours, and particularly in a cross-cultural setting. You will see later that it's not really restricted to cross-cultural work. I'm going to be using a case. I think you have received from Maria a case study. I'm going to give you a few minutes to read it about Betty if you have not already. And at the end, I'll try to leave some time for questions and discussions, hopefully, online, of course, to that. Thank you. So let me take about 3-minute break, not for you, but if you could use this time to look at the case. And I think if we all have a case in mind, it would be easier and more productive to go through the materials today. So Betty, we're going to talk about. So if you could go ahead and read, and I will just highlight something as you read. Betty is a 45-year-old immigrant from Hungary who lives by herself. So as you can see, we don't have to have a client from, say, Syria, which is very current, or Hong Kong, or China, where a lot of Home Fook works with, and many of you may be working with people from Africa, Asia, or Europe itself. Hungary is probably interesting, has a lot of Roma people who are coming in recently. So she's divorced, 2 children, constantly suspicious of other people, whether she knows or not know, who's stealing her belongings and harm or exploit her. She's convinced her ex-husband as well of spreading rumors and giving up her some information, and saying that she's involved in criminal activities, and her stuff are being stolen. Betty's frustrated. The people around her, including her children, are saying that she's imagining things and she may be mentally problematic. Okay, so as you can read this, I'm just highlighting some stuff for you. Betty feels hurt and has repeatedly denied that she has a mental problem, and definitely not insane. So because of her lack of trustworthiness of others, it leads her to feel very stressed and anxious. No one can help her problem, she's convinced, and no friends left, and very few human contacts. In about 3 years ago, she was admitted to a hospital and diagnosed with mental health disorders, namely schizophrenia and delusional disorder. And however, Betty does not believe that she has a problem, and she's not complying with any treatment or medications. Prior to the hospital admission, she was working as a community agency as a receptionist, but she's been laid off. Okay, so she comes to your agency and to seek help regarding her financial situation. So that's, as I said, we'll take a few minutes to read that. I think it's good to keep that in mind. This case may not be as typical, or you've seen one already. Either way, it's sort of a background for us to think about. There are many things that may seem very conventional, but if we go through the lens of the tool that we're going to use, hopefully it will display a bit more. Okay, so let's say if this patient walks into your office and she's seeking help for her financial situation, you probably don't have the information in front of you that she's gone to a hospital, she was supposed to take medication, or she is supposed to be on a sick leave. But all she tells you probably is that she needs financial help. She needs certain kind of application for disability, for OW, if this disability is not successful, or EI is not successful. And then she may even say a few things that she's being followed. It's very hard for a settlement worker to know where to start. Okay, so but you sense a little bit of mental health issue. How do I go about at it? How do I say something without offending her? So if you have some inkling about, is this a mental health issue? If there is something, let me start, having an approach. So presenting problems, it's added here by Maria already. Financial difficulty, fear of being followed, exploited, and there are stressors, financial difficulties, unstable housing, and constantly moving due to fear of being followed or being lost. But she is coming to your agency, and she's able to share somewhat with you, so she knows that you don't know her yet, so she has some trust. Okay, and so you're formulating, how do I get to some of the background problems? How do I understand her potential mental health issues? And this is where we're going to start. Okay, so you're going to have a chance to take a look at this tool called Cultural Formulation Interviews, CFI. And I don't know how many of you have heard of the book called DSM. Basically, it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's in the in the 5th edition right now. Basically, some people may say it's the Bible of all the psychiatric diagnosis. It's what's used in North America. In Europe, if you were trained there or elsewhere, it's probably the ICD. That's the International Classification of Diseases. And within the ICD, there will be similar categorization of all the illness, physical illness and mental illness. The DSM is only about mental illness. And in the DSM-4 version, people started to introduce this thing, CFI, because they felt the DSM is largely very medicalized. It has all the illness without much understanding of the human aspect. It has the DSM basically diagnoses by symptoms. For example, if you have depression, how's your sleep, how's your appetite, how's your concentration, whether you have suicidal thoughts. These are the only symptoms they look at. They don't look at where you come from, how do you think, or what do you think is going on, what do you think is happening, etc. There's no person. There's no anthropological. That's the key word here. So the cultural formulation comes from that background. And the DSM-5, the most current version, has tuned, finer tuned this CFI, the cultural formulation, and it aims for any clinician with any patient, any clinical setting, which, as you can see, can include workers like you and myself. So I'll explain to you how it works. The next slide is that the CFI in its full form has 4 domains and 16 questions. If you feel this lady, Betty, could use a few of those questions, a few of the domains, it's perfectly okay to use it piecemeal, piece by piece. Or if you have the time and she's willing, you can try all 4 domains and 16 questions. And you will probably come to realize why is it useful by reading the content. And at the end, I can summarize a little bit why this is particularly useful from any other standard symptom-focused approach that we do in medicine or in psychiatry these days. Okay, remember, this is a very different from the usual approach that your doctor may use with you about your medical illness. This focused on the person. Okay, so the 4 domains. We will have cultural identity of the individual, Remember, it's a cultural formulation, so it has a lot to do with people's background. And then the second domain is cultural conceptualization. I will explain that. The psychosocial stressors and vulnerability and resilience. So there's the weaknesses and the strength, their successes and failures, and so there's also resilience. So it focuses on both the negative and the positive. And lastly, the last domain is actually looking at the relationship between the individual and the clinician. I know many of you may work with people that at least speak your own language or come from similar cultural background. But as you and I all would know, that no one is perfectly in line with another person. Even if you're a Hungarian, if your client is from Hungary itself, you have probably many differences in terms of social background, education background, regionality, you know, whether you're the age, whether you went through the previous communist era or more current eras, etc. There are many relational differences, and this particular CFI pays attention to the differences between the individual and the clinician and hope to bridge those things, at least keep it in the open. Okay, so that's a broad introduction. So we're going to get into a little bit of the 16 questions now. Okay, so let me see. I'm just checking. There's no one talking yet, so I presume no comment yet. I presume people are still okay with everything. So let me launch into the CFI itself. By the way, the CFI, if you just type in CFI on any Google or search engine, you will find it. It's for free, and it will have all these material. If one day you wanted to use it, and you say, hey, I forgot what that webinar is. It's at your fingertips. Cultural formulation. Okay. So number one question is a very easy one to start. Betty, what brings you here today? So to her, it's likely that she's going to say, I have financial problems and people are following. But the very disarming question, what brings you here today, makes it very, very simple. I think it really puts people at ease and makes you more on the even footing. So I read the parenthesis here. People often understand their problems in their own way, which may be similar to or different from how doctors or clinicians like yourself describe the problem. How would you describe your problem? I think this is a very respectful way. Instead of saying, I heard you have a problem about financial problems. Instead of starting with that, you think that's a shortcut, but that's not worthwhile. I think starting with what brings you here today, one, and if it's more mental health related, in this case, I have a few slides that gives you a bit of sense of what mental health clients may tell you, and don't be alarmed by these responses. Oh, my parents brought me here, my wife brought me here, my family is impossible, I have no problems, leave me alone, no one understands me, you won't understand me, etc. So all these things may come up, but don't be alarmed, and there are questions along that will come to people. So number two question is, again, putting the understanding on the table here. You would say, sometimes people have different ways of describing their problems to their family, friends, or others. How would you describe your problem to them? So this particular question gives permission to people who may have their own views, but they think other people cannot understand them or have already decided what the problem is and they have no room to talk about. So what brings you here, and then reassuring them and comforting them to say, you know, people have different ways to describe things. How do you do it? Okay, so working along with say, if they say I have no problem, I have the same way of how other people, or I have I've been saying the same thing. Other people don't understand me. A few extra questions like, this is not part of the CFI. What's your side of the story? You know, you often assume that they are already kind of been ostracized or being disrespected sometimes maybe, and they probably long for a chance to talk about their side of the story. And then another way of getting to things would be getting what we call the theory of mind, or a level of insight, to say how much are they aware that others are thinking, just by simply asking, what do you think others think your problems are? And then give you a chance to see, what do you think if you have a problem, or what your problem is? And then ask, how do your perception and other people's perception differ? So I think these are really key opening round questions, and you will find them very useful, particularly working with somebody who has very low insight, as Betty seems to be, because she really does not think that she has any problem. It's really the others are doing things to her. Okay? So moving along, number three, this is actually a further way for people to delve into more of the subjective, what they are experiencing, rather than what's happening to them. So what's happening to Betty is that she's been brought to hospital, she's been laid off from her work, she has financial problems. But this question, what troubles you most about your problem, gets into a little bit more of the personal realm. So it's at this spot where your mental health training, whether it doesn't matter how much you've had, and you're using your personal common sense, you will get the sense here. So instead of you're asking people, how's your sleep? Are you feeling down? You hear voices, etc. You give a person a chance to tell you themselves, him or herself. This is much better than a checklist approach. You know, if you start asking them about food and sleep, thinking that they may be depressed, you only get what you ask. But if you ask them, well, how is it affecting you? Then you get a whole reliable subjective material. So here's where you listen. You may hear things. People say, oh, my mood is poor. I'm really angry. I'm really frustrated. I'm depressed. I'm sad. My sleep has been very disrupted. I can't eat. I feel really guilty for losing my family. I can't concentrate at work. That's why I was fired. Or they say, my memory's poor. I don't even want to live anymore. Or some people may go right out to say, I can't concentrate because I have these voices telling me what to do. I don't make sense. I can't think straight. I say these things and nobody believes me. So you can see in your perception, and when you listen to these things, they will come out as probably something a little bit extraordinary. The symptoms may coalesce into some groups, and you get a sense, this person may be depressed, this person may be having a lot of life stress, that's pretty normal, or this person is quite anxious, you know, feeling worried all the time, cannot control how they feel, having panics, etc. So this is the key, is not what you ask them, is what they tell you. Okay, so any questions so far? I see we have 12 people, and here we go. You're cutting out. Somebody was concerned that, okay, if everybody can hear me. If you can't, let me know. We have a technician standing by as well. Okay, so moving along. Question number 4. Remember, these are in sequence, but you could really take a look at it, and you can use any of these questions. And I think over time, when you have incorporated these things, you can adjust it to yourself. Okay. So, what do you think this is? Why do you think this is happening? What do you think are the causes of your problem? So by now, you can see the power of this. It's not what you say to them or your interpretation. So far, you have put the speaking power entirely to your client. Why do you think this is happening? Okay. So some people may explain their problem as a result of bad things that happen in their lives, or voodoo, or bad luck, or science problems, scientific reasons, or chemical imbalance, whatever it is. Let them explain to you. What do you think are the causes? Okay. So this is actually what I find the richest question, and the very useful. They really get a sense of their insight of the issue, and also their perception, their life experiences, their level of understanding. It's most powerful. And then question number 5 is, as I said, what do others in your family, your friends, or others in your community think is causing your problem? So this is as I said earlier, how do things differ from what you think and other people think? You really get a sense of how rich their internal dialogue is, and how their understanding is, and how much they have processed it. Okay, so in this case, Betty, we are guessing Betty is thinking, this is happening to me because my ex is exploiting me, hates me, or Canadian society is a difficult one, or I have bad luck, or there could be many things. We will go into some of the common explanations a little later. So just as we go through the questions so far. Okay, so to expand on how does it work, what's the mechanism, how do you think this, what do you think is the cause of your problem? I have added a few more things. Okay, how does it work? What's the mechanism? People may say it's hard for me to understand. Then you could ask, okay, pretend that you're talking to your science teacher. What do you, asking for more of a rational reason, or pretending you're speaking to a close friend. And the last few questions is a bit more tailored to Betty's case. Okay, so people may want to impress on you the dire or serious situation they're in. They may tell you what they think is the most probable, or the most convenient, or the most important reason for them. And people's mind and brain are always more complex than this. So one of the few questions you can get into is, how much do you believe this? They may be self-serving in many of the explanations. To say it's my ex-husband, it's the society, it's the hospital hurting me. But if you really have a moment to ask, okay, do you have any doubt about this? I'm not a judge. I just want to know, in the back of your mind, do you think this is 100% truth, or 80%, or 95%? So you just want to get a little sense of how much what's the level of conviction they have. Of course, the higher the level of belief or conviction about what they believe, or in terms of this case, Betty, the more likelihood that it's harder to help her, and then more clinical it gets. You may get into some psychotic situation. It would be a psychosis, really. That means that you have lost touch with reality. But if a person who is really anxious, who say, I really think, I want to believe this is my husband doing this to me, but I always think about it. This is the first thing that I go to, and I can't help but to think that's the case. Of course I have some doubts about this. I'm not crazy or anything. I only believe this 60% of the time. Then you're getting into something a little different. This could be more of an anxious, or very frustrated, or very socially very defeated person who really is mad at the world, but they really have still a good grasp on potential reality. So these three questions will help you to gauge how who are you dealing with and what kind of problems and how to proceed. Okay, so moving along, I'm talking at a rate that we probably will still have some time for questions and at the end. Okay, so as you can tell, the last 5 questions are quite putting the person at the center without really putting any of your own theories or guesses in place, and it really is an authentic exchange so far, I hope. And then moving along, the CFI, the cultural formulation, goes a little broader, and they get into, from the individual, it gets into the community and social level. Okay, number 6 is, are there any kinds of support that make your problem better? How's your family? How's your friends? How are your friends? How about others? So for those who are working, if you find somebody who's a single mother coming from Congo and really doesn't have a community like the Italians or the Vietnamese or Chinese who can readily go to their community, it's a whole different ballgame. So how's their family? A single mother, none. Okay, only the church that sponsored me or the school that did. I have no friends. That's a different system. Sometimes if they have a lot of friends, they may be telling her what the friends know, and what do the friends say? Are the friends well-educated, correct, or really in keeping with the Canadian culture or system, or are they also coming from a position of suspicion and I think feeling persecuted, and then they may entrench a person's own view as well. So I'm sure you have heard of stories like that in your work. So really tap into the support network beyond the person now. So number 7, are there any kinds of stresses that make your problems worse, such as difficulties with money or family problems? So this, of course, is you probably already assumed a few things, but again, coming from the person, maybe more you. So people who may have no money in their bank, but they don't feel that they have troubles with money, because if they came from somewhere that they can get by with $10 a day, $2 a day, they may not see the same way as you do, where you're in a different economy. People may prioritize their safety, their mental health, or their sense of security or belonging much more than money. So family could be a huge problem. Okay, so the parenthesis I would just read. People's background or identity can make their problem better or worse depending on their perception. This is my main point. Their identity or their journey, how they got here, they may appreciate certain things and may not really see the same way as you do. So languages, families, ethnicity, discrimination, orientation, faith, etc. These are many other things. Let them speak. Okay, so moving forward, so we're getting to the psychosocial problem in question 7. We'll get the more social network problem in question 6. And then question 8, we come back to the person, okay, and about their identity. And this one you probably can do it pretty fluidly in many other places, but this is to give you official place. For you, what are the most important aspects of your background or identity? I think because you're matched with your community because of your own background, you may think this question is redundant. You think you know it already and it's a waste of time. I encourage you to ask this because things may come out unexpectedly. I have, not too long ago, a person in their 20s, when I asked them, what's really important for you? And that person came out to say, well, I'm struggling with coming out to my parents. So she was struggling with her sexual identity. Some background may come up, as you can imagine. You have your own examples. So again, the clinician relationship with the client should not be assumed too much, and cultural background is a pretty primary thing. Number 9, are there any aspects of your background or identity that make a difference to your problem? Okay, so I have so far assumed that you are working with your own community, but let's say somebody comes from a different country and you are speaking English and you're African, but working with if you're West African, you're working with an East African. Sometimes you may get that on your caseload. Or there's no one who speaks that person's language and you're assigned. Remember, this tool is for any setting with any person, with any clinician. So whether you are far-flung or very close, it's still, it can still use for any person who walks through the door. Or you can ask the person, whether you know them or not, any identity or background that makes a difference to your problem. So here you may anticipate some things like feeling discriminated or racially profiled, etc. Even opens up some questions and topics that we ourselves may not be comfortable with. And that's important to give it a space here. So that's the CFI making 9 there. Okay. Moving along, number 10. Are there any aspects of your background or identity that are causing other concerns or difficulties for you? So 9 and 10 are really putting some space and room for us to get into what could be something that's uncomfortable or difficult to talk about related to people's ethnicity. Okay, moving to number 11. This is about now what people have done in terms of coping and help seeking. Okay, so far, we have 13 people. Welcome. So far, we have looked at a person in a relatively progressive, in a progression of individual subjectivity, their social networks, psychosocial issues. Now we're tapping into what have they done so far. Usually, as a clinician, we know that people don't come to see you unless they have tried to solve problems on their own, with their families, with their friends, or online. By the time they come to you, they have already done a bunch of things. Nobody wants to spend time, with a support worker or a clinician or a doctor unless they feel that they run out of resources or run out of options themselves. So here's the question. Sometimes people have various ways of dealing with problems like this, or like yours. What have you done on your own to cope with your problem? Okay, the problem is always in parentheses. The problem is always the one that's subjectively told by the client, right? So you don't put the problem there. So I just want to mention that because I have. Number 12, often people look for help from many different sources, including different kinds of doctors, helpers, or healers. In the past, what kinds of treatment help advices or healing have you sought for your problem? Okay, so this could be a chance people were talked about. I've used the internet. I went to the temple. I used some numerologist. I've gone to fortune teller or exorcism. This is happening all the time. I've seen, I've worked 15 years in Toronto, and many people have used various ways, whatever is helpful for them. And we are not here again to comment or judge whatsoever, because this is what really meaningful for the patient, for the client. At St. Mike's recently, in our inpatient ward, we actually had a discussion about how to accommodate certain incense burning ritual for people from native background, because there's a 100% banning of any smoke. So that required a fire marshal to come in to make a special case in a slightly outdoor courtyard, etc. So the extent that people are starting to recognize traditional or spiritual rituals as profoundly important, and I think we at the forefront should at least have the very much open mind and being attuned to it. Moving on, and looking at when people look for help, they often hit some walls and have barriers. And then asking them, starting with the internal, has anything prevented you from getting the help you need? Money, work, hours, or family commitments, stigma. Stigma is a huge thing, of course. Discrimination, fear of being laughed at, or lack of services that's existing for their language. Language barriers, of course, is a huge one. So this is a good chance to look at, what have you tried? How come you have not succeeded, and what's frustrating you? So in terms of Betty's case, many of you can start guessing. So people not trusting her, people not listening to her, people giving her diagnosis. This is not to judge whether diagnosis is right or wrong, but from her perspective, people just labeled her without much more detail, but summary. But we are potentially running into those situations. Okay. And number 14, what kind of help do you think will be the most useful to you at this time for you? So far, we have consistently, without exception, asked everything from the client's perspective. It's all subjective. And this is probably striking you now and just driving home the point now. So even for the questions, even for what can be helpful, we are going to put the client in the driver's seat to say, so you walked in today to the settlement clinic. What do you think we can do for you? I work with a lot of clinicians, workers, and in their presentations in terms of problem, the number one thing that I find very useful in giving feedback is people love to jump into how we can help you. Let me refer you to this, let me refer you for a consult, let me refer you to that agency, let me refer you to this, that, or that website, this app. The thing is they haven't heard what the patient or client think is the problem or want. They may only want you to listen. They may only want you to get the OW form, but you don't have to jump into it at this point yet. There is plenty of chance to negotiate and mutually educate about what can be done. So at this point, give them the room to say, what do you think is the help you need most from here for your problem? Okay, so 2 more. So far, I see 14 people and no comments. I presume that you are still able to hear me and thinking along with me. Okay, so 15 is, are there other kinds of help that your family, friends, or other people have suggested would be helpful for you now? Okay, so this gives them a chance to sort of summarize a bit and then again see what they think of it. So my family wants me to go see a doctor, take my medication. I really don't think this is the real point. Betty may say that. Okay, so at least you get a sense. If Betty says, "Well, I'll take this medication. It seems to help me to sleep," but no one really understands my problem with my ex. So that you have a different picture. So other kinds of help. So lastly, number 16 is have you been concerned about this And is there anything that we can do to provide you the care you need? Okay. So this is a bit like 14. The 14 is about what do you think can be for that problem, and then 16 is what we can do for you. You can ask more specifically. So that is the CFI, and it seems so innocent. It seems so simple. This is what the CFI committee has thought out to do, to make it so non-academic. But the 16 questions incorporated years of cross-cultural work and anthropologically based work, putting the person at the first and foremost. And then from there, you can get people's sense of problem, their insight, and gives you a platform to see where you can be involved. So far, here's a question from Farah. How can we address and talk about mental health with newcomers when talking about this topic is considered a taboo to too many of them? Okay, so that's a great question. So if you work back to a few questions before, okay. So let me go back to number 1. What brings you here today? And if they say, you know, again, without getting into a lot of details, you may not need to use mental health words, okay? You don't even need to mention the word, are you mentally unwell, mentally confused, or you're depressed, or you're feeling crazy. You don't need to use any of these words. You just have to use their words. What brings you here today? Sometimes people have different ways to talk about their problems. What's your way? So you probably can have a much easier time, Farah, in terms of using the person's own words. And then by the time when we get to number 3, they may start to tell you, without saying what's the diagnosis or the mental health problem, it can start to tell you what problems it's causing them. They could say, it's making me very hard to sleep, it's making me very hard to trust people, making me very hard to quiet my own mind or let go. These are words that people will use, and it's not a taboo in any culture. It's sharing, and it's using their words. So, as I said, the 16 questions does not put any words on the table to say we're talking about something taboo, but if they are willing to, you gauge what they're willing to talk about, and you proceed at their comfort level. Okay, I hope that helps a little bit. Of course, it's more theoretical right now, but I encourage you to use this approach, and you will see the difference. Let me move on, and please do send chats along the way. It's really been helpful. Okay, we've got a few more slides, and from here on, it's a subsection of the 16 questions, mainly in the first 5 or 6 questions. Okay. And the first 5 or 6 questions of CFI, it comes from this set of tools. It's called the Explanatory Model. And I just want to advance the slide one more. The Explanatory Model comes from this gentleman. His name is Arthur Kleinman. He's a professor he wears 3 hats, professor of anthropology, of sociology, and psychiatry at the Harvard University. And he worked very early on in China, in Taiwan, and of course in Boston, working with Haitians, etc. And the history of this is very interesting. If I take a few minutes. He was able to, speaking of taboo, and in many cultures, he worked in the 70s in mainland China. At the time was pre-reform, and communism is very strict. In the 60s, Cultural Revolution, really. And he was studying how the Chinese communicated about their mental health issues, just like Farah has asked. What happened, what Kleiman encountered in the patients that he saw, where he normally would have diagnosed them as depression in Boston, where he worked, but the majority of these clients were diagnosed as neurasthenia. That's the ICD word, and still a old kind of a diagnosis that basically talks about not a mental health, it's not a mental health diagnosis, but it's a physical health kind of description. It talks about poor energy, poor sleep, poor concentration, and it's much more accepted. So instead of calling it depression, as American would, most Chinese were diagnosed with neurasthenia, because if you call them depressed, that means their spirit or the commitment to the socialist communist cause was not strong enough. It shows a weakness in their political will. But if you call it neurasthenia, it was understandable by everyone because, okay, of course, your body can go weak. That's normal. That's acceptable. So this is Kleiman's very early work, and throughout 30 years of his life, he came up with these 8 questions. It's starting to look familiar because it helps you to understand the things from people's perspective rather than what you call it. So what you call it may make a difference too, but this is more importantly, coming out of that story, he figured out a way to say, how do you tap into what people think? So I hope this looks a little bit familiar to you. It's 8 questions. There's 2 6s there. What do you call the problem? Okay, so can we go back to the earlier slide? Is that just now? Okay. Anyways, maybe let me just move at the pace for so far. If you have any other specific question, I don't know which earlier slide. I just got a comment from Shamima. Okay. So let me continue. In the domain 2, in terms of explanation, the explanatory model is by itself mainly attributed to Kleiman. 8 questions. What do you call the problem? Okay, that's familiar. What do you think has caused the problem? That's familiar. What do you think, why do you think it started when it did? This is a bit more specific, that taps into, if Betty was answering, she probably can give you more detail that our vignette has not talked about. If just using my limited knowledge, let's say Betty is a Roma from Hungary, and she could be saying it started when the government started persecuting me. That's the limited things I know about the history of some of the refugee claimants who have come to Canada. It started by saying, why not have the divorce? When did it start? Because I was verbally or otherwise being mistreated or anything. We don't want to put stereotype too much at work. But this is a good question. Why do you think it started when it did? Okay. And what do you think the illness does to you? How does it affect you? Remember, how does it affect you from day to day? This gives that remember, you can see how much of Kleiman's work has been included in this DSM tool called CFI. Okay. And then number 6 is kind of interesting. It's not in the CFI. How severe is the illness or this problem that you have? Will it have a short or long course? That's something we often don't ask. I work with a lot of people with schizophrenia. They got better with some medication, the voice is gone, they right away would stop medication and say, no longer, it's like a flu. Of course, I don't need to take more. But if we have a chance to say, do you think it's going to long-term or short-term course? If they say sure, then you say, well, unfortunately, I wish it was too, but it's more like a diabetes. You know, it's something you want to maintain and prevent rather than it will go away. And then they will have that knowledge based on this question. Then you have a chance to talk about it. Okay, and number 7, what kind of treatment do you think you should have? What are the most important results you hope to have? So if your intention is to get rid of their delusion, let's say Betty has some paranoid delusion. If your goal is to get rid of the delusion, but if I told you as a psychiatrist that 90% of the time delusions don't go away, even with lots of medication, then you may want to change that. You know, maybe you want to work with the patient, what they think. They may not be looking at getting rid of those thoughts, but your goal is that. But even I'm telling you that it may not go away. So that shifts the goal or the target to the most important part about this kind of client, of Betty, if Betty has paranoia. The most important thing is gaining her trust and having a working relationship with her, so she can actually tell you how is it, you know, what her experience is, and you can help her in the ways that you can. So most of the help one can do for people with delusions or that kind of psychotic illness is really addressing their anxiety and emotional reactions to those things, rather than try to eradicate their beliefs. So that's just a simple fact. Mental health treatment does not do a very fine job in treating those thoughts. That's just a fact. Okay, and number 8, what do you fear most about illness? That's not in the CFI. So these 8 questions are what Kleinman has contributed. And you know his work is deeply transcultural, like all the work that you are doing right now. And why do we use the explanatory model, or why is the explanatory model used so successfully in the CFI or incorporated? So I'm just going to summarize it here because you've heard me talking about it. Okay, so it's the 8 questions here. It's like a mini little interview as an anthropologist who will be asking a person who is at the center of the interview, rather than what you think is great for them. Why me? Why now? What is wrong? How does it work? It's like a mini ethnographic approach. The other kind of a beauty about it is that it's non-medicalized. So Foucault talked about in France years ago, talked about the problem with modern medicine is the clinical gaze that we perform on our patients. We see the patient or client as a dysfunctional body or a dysfunctional mind instead of a person experiencing an illness. And then the third thing I find is that it assumes avoiding that everybody is objective, avoids the assumption that everybody is rational. Okay, a lot of times people you work with may not be rational, particularly when they're stressed. Also, the level of rationality is highly different from person to person. Okay, so in summary, the explanatory model is great as a subjectivity inquiry and getting the sense of what people are thinking. Okay, I'm repeating that because that's what it is. Okay, so why, just as I said, these are summary slides. So you really assess the personal social meaning in a very changing and hybrid and multicultural world. I think I stressed that for Toronto. As I said, you may work with people from your same cultural background, but they may have acculturated or absorbed a Canadian speed, a different speed from you, faster or slower, or more in some levels. They may know a lot more about internet. They may be in a rave dance scene and you're not. So it really opens up a lot of learning opportunity. You're a hybrid and a multi-Brit. You can't assume that you know somebody because you speak the same language. Okay. So it gauges expectation as well, because we are asking them, what do you want from this? What do you think should be changed? Do you think it's long or short? It really takes away the stress from you, because it tells you what the client is thinking. Then you can negotiate and mutually educate about what's possible and what's not. And it really helps the level of satisfaction people have. You know, if you give anybody a chance to talk and then they would tell you what they want, and then you tell them what part of that you can do and part of that may not be possible, people won't blame you. Okay, a lot of times we try to help, and it ends up everybody being. Of course, it provides a platform, as I mentioned, and clarifies conflict. Okay, it helps too, for sure. So the last few slides, I know this is moving along, and our time is still doing okay. This is one of my favorite slides. When you start to ask people with an explanatory model, to say, what do you think is causing the problem? And then you can get into a lot of culturally determined things, and how do you explain things, etc. This is a slide that just gives us a bit of a reminder that different cultures have different concepts of things that are deeply related to mental health. Okay, when we talk about multiculturalism on the superficial side, it's top of the iceberg. We look at people's cooking. You know, do you like like Ethiopian food? Do you like native art? Do you like this festival of dancing? That's multicultural in terms of how we experience it. And literature, drama, that's pretty interesting. Underneath the iceberg, there are a whole bunch of really much more complex things in terms of things like how do we define what is right or wrong, definition of sin. Okay, even sin itself is a Christian Judeo concept. Notions of modesty. You know, some people love to brag, some people are very reserved, feeling it's inappropriate, and then if excessively done, it could be seen as, oh, a problem. Ideas of governing child raising. I couldn't come up with even more complex issues than cross-cultural ideas about what's right and wrong in terms of, you know, treating children. Do you discipline them? Do you push them? How much piano time? How much homework? All these things can come up as mental health issues because we have different understanding or normalcy. Okay, conceptions of justice, notions of leadership, cleanness, kindness, ordering of time, conceptions of self. So this is a little nice iceberg. Even eye behavior. There are many, many things. You know, when they look at me straight, is that normal? You know, every culture has a different way. Body language, conception of status. You know, if you're doing family interviewing, you know, some families only the male would talk or show up. That's completely normal in some circumstances. Of course, you will know. But if we don't take that for granted, we know these are really deeply seated cultural issues. Okay, I hope you have fun with this iceberg. Okay, so I mentioned earlier to say what are the common themes people would think of. You probably get the sense already. Bad luck, brain problems, spirit possession, poisoning, you name it. Don't be surprised. Some of the least expected people may come back to say, to tell you, I think it's a chemical imbalance. I think I really looked at my MRI and it looked great. Or I don't have any spiritual issues. I think I have my nutrition is bad. Some people may be very scientific, even they may not be as educated as you. So we don't assume anything. I think the subjective approach is beautiful in terms of giving us that. Okay. So this is probably my last slide, and it gives you as a last pitch to say, why do you want to use it? I already have those two summary slides. And this is the last clinician to clinician, the reason I will summarize it. So I think it's great because it gives us mutual learning. You know, you probably will agree with me when you see a client is somebody you can talk with and share things with and learn from. It's much more rewarding. And having the person's subjective world in front of you on the table always puts us in a more equal footing and more respectful footing, and it makes you work more rewarding. And this is the easiest way from any culture to convey respect. Okay, this is, I don't care which culture, what language you speak, I think it's pretty universal. If you let somebody talk about themselves in a respectful way, this is a way of showing respect. And of course that by itself is not complete, but it starts there. And it's also a way to initiate or convey some empathy. Knowing how they feel starts with learning what they think. So they're not just another number from Syria or Ethiopia or Congo. They're not statistical. This is a real person with a very private and individual experience in front of you. Okay. So, and second last, it's a chance for ethnocultural transferences, counter-transferences processing. It's an old Freudian word. If you know, from all your background, you may have encountered the word, and we can translate that to sometimes for convenience or time pressure, we may have a lot of transferences or stereotypes or projections onto what people should be like or is like, etc. This is a way to gauge that and help us to understand ourselves, what we bring to the table, because we may not be the expert all the time, right? And last one is the insight of illness. Part of the working with mentally troubled people is to gauge how much do they understand that they have a problem, how much do they understand their illness, what we call clinical insight into their own illness. By asking these questions, you get these questions answered on a platter without having to guess. So imagine if you do a typical clinical interview by a lot of medical students these days, they will ask you, how's your sleep, how's your appetite? It really gives you no information about that person's level of insight. It really just gives you the symptom checklist. Okay, so we have 15 people, and that completes my introduction for the cultural formulation and the explanatory model. And I have summarized quite a bit, and I hope that you will be able to have a chat box with me right now. We have close to 15 or even longer, and I can get a sense of what you're asking. And for sure, please do fill out the online survey about the feedback if you can't chat right now, but I would love to see if you have any questions or thoughts or suggestions about this topic. Okay. This most recent one on the top or the bottom? The bottom. The bottom?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Great. Somebody mentioned send out the link earlier. That's totally good suggestion. Somebody asked whether the recording will be available later. It will be available on the Home Fook site for 2 weeks after today. So that's good. Okay. Maria or Emily, do you have any comments or questions for the webinar as well? We can type it in. Okay. Christy Tai. Is it available for a limited time only, or would it be left up permanently? Unfortunately, I think people were discussing it's usually 2 weeks. Okay. How do I type in here? Post. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. At what level we should refer the client to the psychiatrist? Can you explain a bit more what do you mean by level? At what stage, I presume you mean? In this case, usually in the Toronto system, you go through the GP, your family doctor first, if you have, or the client's family doctor. Of course, if it is to do with safety issues like self-harm or harming others, go to the ER. I'm talking as well as typing, just so more people can reach it. It's not Maria, is it? Okay. So, okay. Those are good questions. Now, let me talk a little bit about at what level. I think there's a as you engage more people with mental health issues, you also gonna find certain level of comfort, and also at a time or a point that you feel it's time to refer to the next level. I think in our system, the way it's set up is that certainly you have your colleagues, your supervisor to discuss about how acute, how safe the client is. If it's acutely suicidal, or somebody has a plan to harm someone else, or children is at risk, or driving is at risk, you certainly have a duty to report that to the respective agencies. As children to CAS, of course, you have all those knowledge. I think it's the safety ones, definitely the more immediate one is the emergency room. That you can, sometimes the family can issue a Form 2. This is something little, some people may not know that, many of you do. A Form 2 is issued at the City Hall by the Justice of Peace. So any family or concerned family or friend can apply for one. that allows, once you have a Form 2, that allows the mobile crisis team or the police officers to take the client to emergency room to be assessed if the client does not want to go him or herself. So if it has a bit more time and the client's willing to get certainly the GPs are the next step. And then if the GP is seeing it appropriate, then the GP can refer to a psychiatrist. So the psychiatry folks in Toronto generally work as consultants to the GP, and sometimes if the patient needs longer treatment, they are referred further for more specialized or longer care. So that's a fuller answer for that last question. So any other ones, Steve, feel free to go as you come as you think of them. Here's a question. Can you explain a little more about the Canadian mental health system behavior? Does an individual have to go through a GP in order to get to any mental health treatment? Sorry again for joining late. Okay, so that's a good reminder. Even though I just explained a little bit of how a GP is the GP's role. The answer is that you don't have to go through a GP. For example, a lot of clients can self-refer to a place like CAMH, the Center for Addictions and Mental Health. CAMH has a self-referral system through fax or online. In the application, they typically do ask, what's your GP's referral number, because that's to do with billing and all that. But it doesn't require the GP to make the referral. So you should consider that a channel as well. So along those lines, for more specialized NGOs like Cross Boundaries, or Fook Mental Health, they also have psychiatrists or mental health workers who are more specialized than some of the resettlement clinics. So that's also, you can make a direct referral without GP. So that question really helped to expand on my previous point. Okay. Okay, the next question is, most of the cases, it's denial. How could we convince the client to see his GP at least? So let's use, I agree, a lot of the cases have an element of denial. And I think my first answer using today's material is that when you start to practice how to use the explanatory model or the CFI in a larger format, you will find it will take some time. You are at the forefront of encountering people and assessing their needs. You may not be able to refer them for a medical appointment with GP within this first session or second or even the 10th. But if you start to engage them and you start to listen to them, you start to come to a point to say, wow, we have tried a lot of things. I know you are having some problems despite all your effort and understanding. You are having some problems sleeping, it sounds like. Or you're getting a lot of irritability. That's not quite you. Sometimes I wonder whether a GP could help that aspect of it. So you can see you have validated the person's own stress, their problems, but you're picking up some things that has some more special domain for a medical GP or a psychiatrist to come in. Hopefully they're also using the explanatory model a bit in their practice too, because we've been teaching a lot of them over the years. So I think what the process is called bridging, or negotiation. Once you understand that person's perspective, they may have room to ask, what do you think? And that you would think, you can say, I really understand you, Betty. I really feel sorry for what you've gone through. There are some things that our body reacts to that may just need some help. Like if you have a flu, you really need a lot of fluids. But if you're not sleeping so well and getting a lot of concentration problems, it does mean your body has reacted in a certain way that we could use some understanding. Let's see whether there is some body problems or mental health issues. No matter what word to use. I think that the point is this tool gives you a chance, a platform to bridge some of your thoughts, your suggestions, but it has to start with what they think. Not has, but it's better to start with what they think. So what you see as denial will come to terms a little bit easier over time when you have engagement. That was a great question. That was from Christy Tai, right? Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. So one last question before we hit 12 o'clock. Thank you for that. That's also from Christy. What can we do for somebody who has learned helplessness or otherwise believes mental health service won't help them? Yeah, I think that's a very profound question. Believing that mental health either has failed or has played a role as a agent of society to control them or to force them into things, and people have negative experiences. This is very common and unfortunate, and this is something we in mental health are becoming more aware of, and the system is changing, albeit quite slowly. This is very understandable. So I would say, in terms of what we talked about today, within the 16 questions, if we could address some of these learned helplessness, understanding where they come from. There are a number of questions that talks about what have you tried, what has not worked, how did it make you feel when you try to do this, what kind of barriers you ran into. I think part of that work that you have done is that what you will be doing is getting the information and understanding where people's experience came from or whether they're based on, and then empathizing with that, maybe validating it, and once that piece of difficult work is done and you have come to a point that they agree and you agree the system is limited, has its faults, and if we can still develop some new hope or give another chance and keep trying at some level, I think that may be the positive thing that can come out of this approach. And if you are there to support the patient in navigating the system and reduce the sense of helplessness, it will be another a big change, a big positive aspect. So acknowledging that's the issue, and I appreciate that question. And I hope it's not 100% that way. And I think that brings to the point that what you do out there is really, really important. So, okay, I think this is a 11:59. I will do the very last question from Shamima again. It's mental health service costs money. Many do not have benefit package. Yeah, I agree with you. I think the system I talked about in terms of CAMH, or those are of course free. That's covered by OHIP. If people need behavior therapists or psychologists or counselors who are not MDs, they're certainly caught. Even with benefits package, it's only about $500 a year. You barely get an initial consult and one more session. So it doesn't. It's a problem for almost all people. So I would say at this point we can use more grassroots organizations like Cross Boundaries, Fook, your own organizations, these are some of the things. So GPs are not a great solution, but there is a way to have some access to professionals as well. And more severe illness, I think we're a little bit better in dealing with severe mental illnesses, that there are more services out of hospitals or CAMH to do that. So thank you for all your questions, and hopefully it was of some use. And I see last point, somebody said thank you very much, and that's from me as well. Thank you all. Okay. Take care.